Another exciting week.
Yes, it is.
The last thing that I read that applies to what we want to talk about today is the fact that in the Iranian parliament today, people were noting the fact that America is always very quick to complain about human rights violations in other parts of the world, especially Iran. But they have a lot to say about what they consider to be human rights violations in Ferguson, Missouri. So it's interesting to see how this might develop. And then I decided I would just, because of the executions in other parts of the world, I decided I'd look at the list in Wikipedia of the executions that have been carried out in the United States this year. And I have on my screen here a list of 27 carried out by lethal injection. And the top one, he was a male, a black male, who was 23 at the age of his offense and 62 at the age of execution. One wonders what sort of life he led and what he got out of it, and just exactly what that has to say about human rights in the United States.
Well, I mean, you're hopefully certainly not going to compare a properly adjudicated death sentence with the beheading of James Foley in Iraq, are you?
Well, he didn't have to wait 40 years for it
No,
anyway.
I understand. That's the old joke that being on death row in Texas is safer than being on an airplane.
I mean, it's also interesting that, please, I must not
No, I know
let
you're not.
anybody get the impression that I'm approving of the beheading of Foley. I'm not. It's awful, terrible. However, what interests me is the different ways in which these things are reported. And Saudi Arabia was also in the news today for threatening to behead somebody. And it's there the favored method of execution. And of course, I suppose the French have the reputation for being particularly efficient executioners in the 18th century. One wonders how efficient the Saudi executions are. And one wonders exactly, I think there was a film of Foley's execution, was there, which I haven't watched. I don't know whether that was done efficiently or not.
I have not watched the film. I do not think they showed the actual beheading. It faded to black, and then they showed the body lying on the ground with the head on top of the body.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, my point is that it's amazing to me that execution is still something which has to be discussed and is done in so many different ways in different parts of the world, and in some cases is considered to be done humanely. In other cases is considered to be done as punishment or as to set an example, or as revenge in the case of Foley for what the US forces were doing to in their bombing of the Islamic Caliphate.
I think, and I've been thinking about this. In fact, I discussed it at lunch with our mutual friend, and I think one of the things is the Western revulsion at decapitation. Perhaps in an Islamic country or in Japan, I don't know. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that insofar as history and primitive people and their method of execution. Of course, the French with the guillotine is certainly the notable Western exception. But between the decapitation and the filming of it, and the forcing of the captor to say what he did, and it just seems to strike a particular nerve in the West. And it's basically left Obama in a position now where he had to then admit that 6 weeks ago there was a commando team on the ground in Syria that had been attempting to rescue Foley. And then there's no way he's going to be able to back down militarily. I mean, the airstrike campaign is only going to have to increase. And it's ultimately then going to lead to some small contingent on the ground to better focus in laser targets for the guided bombs. And then, after that, off we go. So,
Yeah, so aggression creates international problems, and crime creates civil problems in each country. The Elizabethans, I think, were pretty good at execution, weren't they? The original
that's
Elizabethans.
true. Good point. Yes.
Just exactly I'm not sure when hanging became the favored method of execution in the Western world. And I think that lasted until the middle of the last century when it was changed. Well, it was simply the execution was terminated in Europe, I think, generally.
Right. But even in the 1960s, the two killers in cold blood were hung in Texas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
And then it was changed. It was abolished here and then reintroduced in 1973, but it was changed to lethal injection. And then, of course, recently there's been a lot of argument about whether lethal injection is okay, but nothing. I haven't seen anything about the idea of actually abolishing the death penalty in the U.S. again. Anyway, and then, of course, the number of civilians who've been killed in Gaza, and the fact that the Israeli forces are now being accused of actually targeting specific civilians, even though they're civilians with political responsibility. Provides more context for this whole thing, I think, and it's context which really gets no attention.
but what kind of context is it? I mean, one could say that the context is an entity or a people or a government making the decision that they're going to advocate their position no matter what. No matter what recriminations might come globally, no matter what complaints or human rights violations. I mean, no matter what, this is what they feel they must do. And I read the Jerusalem Post periodically online, and there are no tears there being shed for the collateral damage in Gaza.
No.
And by the same token, I'm sure that if you're an extremist Sunni, there's no tears being shed for James Foley.
No. Though there are, I think, in Haaretz you'd see something different from the Jerusalem Post. But I think generally the problem is that we haven't made up our minds about human life and its value and under what circumstances it should be terminated. We still have problems with abortion. Generally, we're very worried about the numbers, about population growth, and I think that there's a much larger context about just exactly who's and of course assisted suicide is in the news.
Right. Yes, you're right. Yeah. But it's funny when you say we. All right, then I know you're speaking. I know where you're speaking from. But let's follow this theme a little bit. We've often talked about how globalization and increased communication and horizontal connectivity is developing a collective consciousness that is beginning to supersede national boundaries and national sovereignty lines. But yet again, in most of the instances we've discussed, what we're talking about are governmental or quasi-governmental objectives that have been reasonably and rationally made by people who are advocating them, who are saying, this is what we're going to do, no matter what. So,
but in every case, they have a relationship to public opinion.
Their own internal small public opinion.
And of course, public opinion is now, there's more and more participation in the formation of public opinion and less information in the formation of public opinion. Or maybe I shouldn't say less information because there's more information available generally, but nevertheless less effort to make sure all the necessary information is available in order to form an opinion. Mm-hmm. What I'm suggesting in order to try and make sure that I'm being clear is that there's on the one hand, lots of people are getting killed for various reasons, some of which appear to be justified, some of which appear not to be justified. on the one hand. On the other hand, our general level of awareness is rising. And so we're much more aware now of how much is going on of this type. And the overall point that I wanted to make is that our level of awareness is rising much faster than our ability to deal with the problems that we find out as we become more aware.
All right,
That's what causes more and more trouble.
I can agree with that. In fact, the Foley execution is a case in point.
Mm.
Right? I mean, that's something that even the average man on the street in the United States has now reached a position where they think ISIS needs to be punished. And even Congress collectively, which can't seemingly agree on anything, is urging the president to do more to punish them. Now, we can go on and on about the road that will lead down and how that's going to just unveil more pitfalls. But the point is that the kind of collective understanding and real-time awareness that people get is, in fact, prodding governmental institutions into action. I mean, there's nobody in this country, I think, who would object to the dropping of the 101st Airborne Division into certain parts of Iraq and have a firefight that left all of the ISIS fighters dead.
Well, we still have a general attitude in this country that the world is out there for America to police.
Yes, but let me just respond with what the globalization lesson that I have received as an American and as a participant in the globalization collectiveness. They cut the head off a 40-year-old man who was a journalist, who was innocent.
Yeah.
I mean, they should be punished.
Well, if you think that justice is punishment, yes. But
well, I guess I'm sort of playing devil's advocate here. I mean, so where does it end? When does the benefit of globalization finally come into play here, and we begin to benefit from the leaders of these factions, whether it be Netanyahu or the leader of ISIS, begin to say, oh my, I can't take this global criticism. I can't take this global ostracism.
The continuing rise of global awareness should gradually bring about a situation in which interaction takes precedence over the idea that you can enforce a particular point of view. Now, we have the biggest problem in the world at the moment is between the parts of the world that are following the Western acceleration of technological advance and the parts of the world that are resisting the associated influence of changing Western values.
Mm-hmm.
And the latter is associated with Islam, and Islam is trying desperately to reconstruct a past that they don't really remember very well and idealize. And this is causing a terrible exaggeration of the problems between the two parts. But every time we try to impose our will because we think we're right and they're wrong, we increase the opposition to what we're trying to do. That's the problem.
I don't disagree with that, and I'm not going to put you on the spot. But let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, you are securely within the bosom of one of the world's major educational institutions. Let me put you in the Oval Office at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. What would you do?
I'd try to get the Constitution rewritten, I think.
Well, I don't disagree with that either. But what would you do right now? I mean, what choices does Obama have facing him?
I think he has a record of being fairly eloquent. Yes. Compared to recent presidents we won't name.
Yes.
And yet he's said very little in the last few weeks. And although I don't in fact think that his delivery of his speeches is all that good, but the way they're put together and composed is generally quite good. Mm-hmm. And I think the first thing he needs to do is to work out how to present the American position in a more eloquent way to more people. Mm-hmm. Because I think that would very much enhance his standing in this country as well as internationally. At the moment, it's the people who oppose him who get much more attention in the media than he's getting.
Do you think if he was able to craft such a response or a position, would he be able to reach the so-called Arab street, or is already too much water under the bridge?
I think people would take notice of him. Just exactly what effect it would have at this stage is difficult to tell. Mm-hmm. But no, he's in a terribly difficult position. For a number of reasons, which includes the various lobbies, including the Israel lobby in Washington, mm-hmm. But also the divide in Congress.
Right.
However, he's got, 2 more years, and he's got nothing to lose.
Right, right. No, I mean, there's 2.5 or so years to go, and there is nothing to lose. And yeah. I guess the thing that I think people need to be aware of is that, I mean, this is a fellow who has time and again unleashed the American military on required raids, whether it be bin Laden or whether it be rescuing the ship captain and from the pirates. You can go right down the list. And I was even surprised to see that they had a commando team of at least 36 people operating in Syria for 2 days. Right, that engaged in a firefight with ISIS that left a number of militants dead and 1 slightly injured American soldier. I mean, that's a pretty courageous decision. You talk about, you said in the apple cart.
It's been done quietly.
Very quietly, and it would never have reached the light of day had it not been, I think, for people, news media digging after Foley's execution.
Yes, it's a very different style from what we've seen in previous presidents.
Yes. I just. My own view is that something is going to happen now, all right? Because I don't think any president, especially if they execute the second one now, all right, which they very well might, because the airstrikes have only intensified. If they execute the second one, I don't see how there's not going to be an increasing escalation on our end militarily.
Well, next week maybe. We may have even more to talk about.
Yeah, as we were doing the editing for this show earlier today, we were talking last week about the peace negotiations between the Israelis and Hamas in Egypt, and you said, I don't think that's got much of a chance. And lo and behold, you're exactly right. Since we last spoke, they've canceled them and everybody's gone home, and they've started shooting rockets again and moving the military in.
Yeah. So, of course, it is approaching the end of the summer, so the season may have something to do with what's going on. Yeah. But in general, the situation between the situation in the Islamic world and the rest of the world seems to be getting more and more uncertain.
I should say so. Well, let's wait and see what happens next week.
Okay.
All right, Brian, thank you very much.